Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 60, Summertime Reviews. Happy summer, Point Blank listeners. I hope you're having a good one, and depending on where you are in the U.S., or in the world, you're not burning up from the temperatures this year. But my name's Kurt, and welcome back to Point Blank. Joining me once again, here's Justin.
Hey, Kurt. Hey, listeners. How's it going?
Well, it's going pretty good for me, Justin. I just finished, we took a little trip. We took the boat out for a few days, and that was nice. So I've got to go back to work soon, so I think my summer is pretty much over. How about you?
It's funny. I was thinking about how much of the year I spend fantasizing about summer, and then as soon as summer hits and it's 99 degrees, and now with this incessant humidity that Albuquerque has inherited from climate change or whatever, I spend the entire summer fantasizing about fall. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm tired of being hot. That being said, I have a couple trips I get to look forward to in the second half of my summer before I go back to class. How was the weather when did you have to deal with those insane Pacific Northwest temperatures, or did that heat abate?
That's abated at this point. I missed some of that. I was at work. I mean, I'm sure in the eastern part of the state, it is still ridiculously hot, but here it's cooled down significantly. In fact, for our boat trip, we were actually hoping to have warmer weather, and it was fairly chilly, especially in the evenings and such. But no, none of the ridiculous temperatures right now.
Well, that's good.
I have had some time for some summertime reading, well, at work. So we're going to get into some reviews today, Justin. I think we both have quite a pile to get through today. Am I right?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we read constantly, and when we're doing deep dives in subject unknowns, we pile up additional books that we can't use for those episodes. So I have a grab bag of books I want to talk about today. This may or may not be one of our last 5-round reviews. We might be shifting toward more deep dives and subject unknowns in the future because of time schedules. So we're going to make the most of this one.
All right. Well, Justin, with that, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think I have 6 reviews today. I'm going to start off with one by an author that I hear about again and again. The name of this book is Maxine Unleashes Doomsday, and the author is Nick Kolakowski. This was put out a few years back. I think it was put out by Down and Out Books, and this is set in a dystopian near future in the Northeast U.S. Our main character is a gal named Maxine Hardwater, who we see as a teenager in parts of the book, and also later on as an adult, dealing with the trials and choices and consequences of her challenging life. I picked this book up at the beginning of the pandemic, at a time when my wife and I were pretty much locked in our house. We couldn't go out. There was a lot of anxiety and apprehension about what the future was going to look like. And I thought, hell, this is the perfect time to read a dystopian tale about the possible end of the world. So I came in with a lot of expectation. I was hoping the book would be like, just knock my socks off. And I did like it. Let me tell you a little bit about it. Maxine is our protagonist. Her early life was one of promise. She was smart, savvy. She went to college or contemplated college, but she had a rough early life, and she fell in with a bad crowd. And this opened up the door to what ultimately became an outlaw life. In particular, she became adept at holding her own on the road as an escort for convoys delivering goods through post-apocalyptic cities and bandit-filled rural spaces. There are some very obvious elements of Mad Max Fury Road in here, or Mad Max in general. The author Kolakowski said it himself, so if you're into sort of that road warrior shit with your post-apocalyptic fiction, you might like this book a lot. The framework for this novel is that scientists are looking back on Maxine and this point in human history in a clinical way, where they're sharing analytical journal entries or maybe computer notes about this time in history. as they piece together the past. I like Maxine as a character. There are a lot of characters in this book, but she's center stage. She's likable. She has a lot of flaws. She's bitter, but she clearly has this desire to be more than she is. There's also tragedy in her character. But this book isn't just heavy-handed. There's also a lot of humor to lighten up some of the heavier aspects. At one point, for example, we learn that the New York Giants football team has now become a crime syndicate that controls several towns near Buffalo. So I can't get that image out of my head of these dudes still like in their football uniforms, running blackmail and such. So Kolakowski can write. He's a very good writer, and this story is rich with imagination and pathos. I liked it. I wanted to love it, but I liked it. There's a lot to this story. A lot of characters, a lot of action, a lot of flashbacks, a lot of bad guys. Maybe too much of all this stuff. That's probably the one thing that's forces me to hold back on my rating. But overall, this is a good book, and I think a lot of folks would like it. I'd recommend it to anybody who likes their sci-fi dystopian, their crime fiction Fast and Furious, and their noir technicolor. Have you read that one, Kurt?
No, but I'm glad to hear your pretty positive review there, because it is the kind of thing I really like, and I did pick it up a while back. It's on my Kindle, and I just hadn't gotten to it yet. But I'm a sucker for that kind of fiction, and I will definitely be checking it out down the road here.
Good. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts, because I think it's one that with enough material in it that it would allow for a pretty interesting discussion.
Well, first up for me this time, I've got a couple this episode that are from the same author, or I read two books by the same author. And the first series is two by Jean-Patrick Manchette, who is a fairly famous French noir author. And it strikes me, thinking about these books, Justin, that we did do that Mediterranean noir episode, but we really haven't done an episode that focuses on French noir fiction. And that's such a huge part of this genre. We're going to have to do that at some point down the road. But the two that I've got, the first one is No Room at the Morgue from 1973, and the second one is The Prone Gunman from 1981. Now, the author is kind of a well-known character, I guess, in France literary circles, just for his political involvement and being something of a character, or I guess a stereotypical French author to some degree. I did feel that, just first off, both of these books, I felt like there was a little something missing in the translation. So keep that in mind. But I did enjoy both of them. The first one, No Room, this is his take on a sort of Chandler-esque mystery. We have a down-and-out detective. His name is Tarpon. Tarpon's a former cop who just, I want to say about a year or maybe 2 years prior to the events in this novel, he was a cop who accidentally kills a protester during a labor protest. And this happens outside of Paris. He has to escape the situation and go to Paris, and he decides he's going to become a private eye instead of being a police officer. Well, he doesn't do a very good job at that. In fact, he has not really received a single client, and the book starts out with him sitting in his office, getting drunk, and considering that, thinking that he's probably going to give this maybe another week, and then he's going to give it up. What should happen? But a beautiful woman walks into his office and desperately needs his help. Her name is Memphis Charles, and she is dripping with blood. Her roommate is dead, and of course she's suspect number one. And now she needs Tarpon's help to clear her name. From there, things get out of hand, and as the name or title of the book suggests, the bodies start to pile up. Now, this one overall, I did enjoy it. I did think that it's definitely an homage to Chandler and that the American-style detective story. I think he does certainly take his own twists with it, and ultimately it's a satisfying book. And I think even to delve a little bit down the road of where this plot goes kind of starts to give away what you can find in this novel. But really, I enjoyed the writing. It's a pretty short, quick read, and overall a hit for me. Now, the other one is The Prone Gunman. And here we have the author's take on sort of the One Last Job novel. And that's the one thing, maybe it's these two novels that I picked, but perhaps Manchette stands on his own in other novels, but both of these two seem to be, writing in response to cliches of the genre, which was okay, but I maybe would have liked to have seen a little bit more original ideas. But in here, our hitman, Martin, he wants to get out of the trade. He's ready to retire. He wants to go home to his boyhood home and reclaim his childhood crush. Well, he tries to get out, and like all stories of this type, that doesn't really go so well. So the question becomes, will he be able to save the money he's earned as a hitman? Will he be able to claim his girl? And will he be able to get away with his life? Overall, this is a good retelling of that type of story. It is, as you might expect, a little bit predictable. It's a very short novel, more of a novella, really. And I would say that the relationship between him and this childhood crush is a little bit weird, because they were never dating as children or anything like that. He just decides that he's going to come to town and sort of claim her. That felt awkward, even though I know it was intended to be awkward in the novel. So, just keep that in mind. This is a hit, but not a kill shot for me. The Assassin has sort of missed its mark. Now, this was made into a apparently terrible film in 2015 called The Gunman, starring Sean Penn and Javier Bardem, as well as Peter Franzen. And I looked that up because I was not familiar with the film, and it has a whopping 17% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So if you haven't heard of that one,
yikes.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. It also looked like they completely changed the plot of the movie, even though they claim it's based on this one. So anyway, that was a little dip of the toe into French noir, and if anything, it did make me curious to do a subject unknown in which we explore the realm of these classic French noir works a little bit more thoroughly.
That sounds great to me. I still haven't finished reading the trilogy that we started when we read Total Chaos. I know that you read all three of those books, but any excuse I have to get back to that world, I'm game. So
Yes.
All right, so my second review is one where I delve away from my traditional fodder. This is a less serious foray into crime fiction. I'm reviewing the book titled Noir by Christopher Moore. And if you're familiar with Christopher Moore's other work, he's a writer that incorporates a lot of humor into his plots, and sometimes he toys with genres, and sometimes he doesn't. This is his first and only take, I think, on the hard-boiled detective genre, and it's pretty good, I would say. I enjoyed it for a lot of reasons. He appropriately channels a lot of the tropes that are common to the books that we read and review on this podcast. And it's clear he's done his homework. He isn't half-assing, his attention to the genre. This is a novel that takes place in San Francisco in 1947. The main character is a guy who goes by the name of Sammy Two Toes Tiffin. He tends bar at a place called Sal's Saloon. And the story involves a gal, of course, who enters the bar one day. Her name is Stilton, and her nickname is The Cheese. When she goes missing, Sammy makes it his goal to find her. So that's the main plot wheel. We get some stuff about Sammy's past, the reasons he did or did not, serve in the war, World War II. We meet a lot of amusing characters, too many to count, so many that I got lost by some of them. One of them was Sal, who owns the saloon, and his invention for a pizza for dogs called a dog pizza. We have a shipment of black mamba snakes, with sort of a side plot related to the Chinese laborers who Sammy works with and who he is friends with. We get a racist cop who plays a role in the story. We get space aliens. We get the shenanigans of whatever the hell's happening up at Bohemian Grove, which is that notorious summer camp for the ultra rich. There's almost too much going on in this story. Like Moore doesn't know when to stop, and maybe that's part of the hilarity. Maybe not. It depends on what you're looking for. But I found this book to be full of like one-liners that had me laughing out loud, and that's not something I do normally. I'm the kind of guy who laughs in his head. So while I think the plot is pretty convoluted, and that knocks some points off for me. This is a funny book. I found it very funny, and I imagine some of you might as well. So if you want a smart, goofy take on hard-boiled detective fiction set in post-war San Francisco, and you can overlook a plot that gets kind of absurd, this may be your book. I definitely recommend it for those of you who like that kind of thing.
Well, Justin, that's interesting to hear your review of that. It was a long time ago, but I don't know if you remember, I reviewed that book for the podcast as well. And I pretty much said almost the same thing that you did about it. So it's good with some time and space to see you had basically a similar reaction to that I did to the book.
And I thought you might have. I remember that you had reviewed some kind of humorous noir book, and there's only so many out there. So I'm glad to hear you actually did that. Sometimes we do overlap, but 3 years apart. I've read Moore's work in the past, so I knew what I was getting into. He doesn't go into his humor lazily, and it's the kind of humor that really speaks to me, the kind that's absurd or almost surrealist. So
yeah, and you're right about Moore, because there's very few people, I think, who pull off writing humor, especially in a science fiction or fantasy or noir way well. And he does it. He pulls it off. So for readers or writers interested in seeing how to do that well, I think Moore is definitely somebody to point them to.
For sure.
Okay, up next for me, I've got something, I guess I'm going to put this in a special interest category. This is called Timber Beasts, a Sage Adder historical mystery by S.L. Stoner. And this is kind of one of those things that you don't find unless you go to the local bookshop and you look at the regional authors category or something like this. This is a Pacific Northwest historical mystery. And there's a whole bunch of these. I think there's 8. Now, let me just read you something. Sage is a secret operative in America's 1902 labor movement, leading a double life that balances precariously on the knife edge. That is from the back of the book. So you're kind of getting a sense of what this book is about. It's written by a labor union and civil rights attorney, and each of these books does sort of attempt to teach a little bit of working class history from the Pacific Northwest. So while this is a very enjoyable tale for myself, it does get a little bit, I don't know, I guess you could say preachy at times, and you'll find that in Timber Beasts. In this book, we start off with a young boy who's trying to catch a ride on a train, and he and his brother are riding the train, and one of the brothers is rather viciously killed by the railroad bull, or the railroad police officer. They're heading to Portland, and when they get to Portland, that's where Sage is located. The surviving brother gets accused of the murder of the railroad bull when he's found dead. We enter Sage, and then this becomes a story of looking into the crooked dealings of the railroad bull, the timber company, buying up land, forcing small lumberjacks off their land, and getting corporate timberlands consolidated and whatnot. It does give us a nice look into what small towns of the Pacific Northwest, Portland, and to a limited extent, Seattle looked like in this time frame, and also just how volatile of a situation it was. It was a really rough and tumble landscape, and there was a lot of tension in this time between the laborers of many different industries and the owners and industrialists trying to come in and make a killing in the Northwest. Along with Sage, we get his sort of band of sidekicks that you find in this type of book. His estranged mother, who has come out and they've reconnected. He has a friend and sidekick, Fong, who is a former Chinese laborer. And then his lover is a brothel owner in Portland as well. I give this one a hit if the underlying themes are interesting to you, if you're interested in Pacific Northwest history, if you're interested in labor history. Otherwise, it's kind of if you're just there for the mystery, it's a little bit of a cookie cutter. Now, as the series progresses, it might advance, but this was book 1 of the series.
I like regional books. I mean, of course, they're hit and miss in terms of quality, but if you find one that's really place-centric and doing it well, it's great. It's a great find. So cheers to local bookstores.
Yes.
So my next review is a literary mystery called White Tears, and it's written by Hari, Hari, Kunzru. And this came out a couple years back. It's a smart, weird, complicated novel about record collecting in New York City, about cultural appropriation, American white supremacy, and ghosts. It's also a ghost story.
Wow.
The story follows, it's a real weird book, and there's a lot going on really quick, and there's a couple turns that it makes that will keep you either deeply invested or perplexed as it goes on. So it follows the main character, who's a socially awkward young adult named Seth, and his friendship with Carter, who's a trust fund kid with a hot, damaged sister and an important family. And by important, I mean incredibly rich. Carter and Seth are record collectors. They're enthusiasts who search for the authentic. I say that in quotes. They're always at record stores. They're always hunting for old-timey music from the 20s and 30s, particularly black music from that era. They also build a fan base when they unite to do music production stuff together by finding records and incorporating new elements and doing random found sound recordings by walking around the streets of New York City and recording things they hear. On one of these recordings, they hear the voice of a man singing these beautiful lyrics, but neither of the guys remember having recorded the lyrics or seen the man. It's all entirely new to them, so the song is very haunting, and they actually take the song and they release it. It gets great acclaim. People are freaking out over this found music, and Carter says to people that the name of the song is, he gives a name, and then he says that it's written by a guy named Charlie Shaw. This is a made-up name. He just thought it sounded good. He thought he would sell the record with a made-up name. But then a guy comes knocking on their door, a guy who's an old record collector, and he's freaking out about this music and about Charlie Shaw. To him, Charlie Shaw is a real guy. He says, "Where did you find this Charlie Shaw song?" But how could this be possible? Carter made up the name. So things get real weird. Is this Charlie Shaw a long-lost blues musician, or a fabrication made by these two white music producers in New York City? This is a novel that asks the question, what is authenticity and what is exploitation and appropriation? I'm reading the book and enjoying it thoroughly up until the halfway point, and then all of a sudden we get a new point of view. We're now like 40 years in the past. We're with a brand new character, and we're seeing this character do things. This character is also a record collector. They're doing things that duplicate what some of the stuff that Seth was doing in the first half of the book. Is there something to be learned from this duplication? It's clear that something is cosmically wrong, and the one thing that will right things is that we have to find Charlie Shaw. We got to track this guy down, if he exists. In the third act, people begin to die. Ghosts seek vengeance, and we learn that this book is not playing lightly with themes of race in America. Jim Crow and cultural appropriation take center stage in the third part of the book. I really liked the playfulness of the novel. Hari Kunzru doesn't mind getting complicated, doesn't mind forcing the reader to pay attention. It's a mystery yarn, which is why I'm reviewing it here, but it's not like any one I've ever read before. An unusual, smart, engrossing read. If you are a music collector, an enthusiast of black music, or someone who likes literary genre-blending novels set in New York City and the American South, I'd recommend checking it out. It's not perfect, and it might throw some people off because it is a little weird, but it was fully engrossing. So I give it a hit.
That does sound interesting, Justin. I do enjoy a novel like that throws the tropes of the genre out the window every once in a while, and really challenges the reader and future writers to do something new with it. So for that, it sounds like worth a read.
And for those reasons.
Next up, I have two by Jim Harrison. This is The Great Leader, which came out in 2012, and The Big Seven, which came out in 2015. Now, these are some of Harrison's last works, and I believe they're collectively called the Faux Mysteries, which I think is an allusion to the fact that these aren't really mysteries. There's a mystery element or a crime fiction element to these books, but it's a more of an internal investigation for our main character, Detective Sunderson of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Now, Sunderson we meet him in the first book just as he's retiring as a detective. He's sort of your traditional small town cop. He's spent his entire career up there. He said he had to shoot at a person once, and that was purposely at their feet. And that was the only time he ever had to draw his gun on a person in a complete career, mostly just responding to your average small town type crime calls. When we find him, he's recently, within the last couple of years, he's divorced. He drinks way too much. He's depressed. He's addicted to trout fishing. He loves reading history. And for a 65-year-old man, he also has the libido of somebody about half his age. And we learn a lot about Sunderson's sex life and sexual fantasies in both of these books. That might be a little bit much for some readers, but it is definitely there. Now, in the first book, The Great Leader, we do find one case which he encountered relatively late in his detective career, where there was a cult that had bought land in the UP because it's out of the way. Its land is relatively cheap up there. And Sunderson could never prove, but there was good evidence that this cult leader may have been a pedophile and abusing especially young girls who were brought in with their mothers or fathers into this cult. Through this first book, he tries to sort of track this cult leader. It brings him down into Arizona, where an encounter with members of the cult lands him in the hospital. Now, this is where I say this is kind of a detective story because he is trying to find this great leader. But what the real mystery is Sanderson investigating the nature of religion, aging, and himself. And it's dark, it's brooding, and like almost anything written by Jim Harrison, it contains basically magical prose on almost any given page. It is just, it's haunting and beautiful and I listened to this one as an audiobook, and I think in some ways it was even more impactful that way. Really, just a good book. It made me want to get a cabin in the UP and go trout fishing and get away from civilization. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that was the kind of impact that this book had. In the Big Seven, we encounter Sunderson shortly after the events of the first book. In the first book, he has a complicated relationship with his ex-wife and a teenage neighbor named Maura. And in this book, that complication is elevated to the next level. And by saying anything about that, I think I would be spoiling both the first and the second book. His family problems are complicated. To get away from this, he buys a cabin that's even more remote in the UP and finds himself involved in a backcountry feud between two or more branches of a bickering family. Well, people end up dead, and he ends up getting involved in the investigation of those murders. Really, what this book is an investigation into the nature of sin. Overall, I think you can tell that I really enjoyed both of these books, but I will say that the examination into Sanderson's sex life will be disturbing for some. There's a little bit of a Lolita element going on here. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure that there's a piece of ass that this detective is not get excited about throughout both of these books. And I'm not sure if that says more about the character or more about Jim Harrison as an aging man than anything else. Yeah. That said, these are deep philosophical novels, I think, about the nature of aging, about complex feelings, and I enjoyed them. And I haven't read a ton of Jim Harrison, but it was refreshing to get back into his work, or haunting, I guess, in some ways, knowing that these were books that he wrote nearing the end of his life. Overall, this is definitely two solid hits for me. I recommend them with slight hesitation.
Thank you for that. I like Jim Harrison a lot. I've read a few of his works, and he is an author who is not the kind to shy away from dealing with complex issues, to facing life soberly, or maybe not soberly, because he spent a lot of his time drinking wine by the jug, but clearly, articulately confronting some of the harder parts of what it is to live. I remember when I lived in Tucson, I found out that he lived down in Patagonia, which is a small lake town in the far south of Arizona, and I'd watch these videos of him almost toothless, chain smoking, drinking wine, coming up with stories, and so much of his stories he was still writing about the UP and Michigan and this place, this landscape that haunted him and served as his muse. Yeah, and he passed away just a couple years ago. So looking forward to checking those books out. Thanks for sharing them. I always forget about this guy. Yeah. Forget about his work, but I shouldn't.
Yeah, and I had to go back. There's actually a pretty good episode of Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown. Well, there's actually 2 episodes of Anthony Bourdain's show that he interviews Jim Harrison. But the Parts Unknown is just before the end of his life. They meet in Montana, and they use some of Harrison's writing as the structure of the episode. It was pretty good. It was good to go back and see this in a different context now than when I originally saw the episode.
2 late legends together.
For sure.
Okay, so my next read is a advanced reader's copy. We got this from Akashic Books, and still, if I get an arc and I don't like the book, I'm not going to review it. In this case, I did like it, and the name of the book is Palm Springs Noir. Obviously, it's one of the many books in the Noir series that Akashic puts out. I wasn't expecting this, but I found this to be one of the better books in the Akashic Noir series. At first, I figured that wouldn't be possible because, as we all know, Palm Springs is hot and bright and sunny and wealthy and golf courses and swimming pools, and it does not seem to be the kind of place where enough authors would figure out how to capture the human darkness that is necessary for good noir. But where there is great wealth disparity, and the chasm between the haves and have-nots is where most crime happens, as we know. From story to story, I realized that this is actually a great place if the writer can figure out the right recipe to capture noir effectively. The editor of this book is Barbara DeMarco Barrett, and she writes in the introduction, "While the greater Palm Springs area has its share of dive bars, its alleyways tend to be tidy and clean, and femme fatales are more likely to be found in bathing suits than slinky dresses or tailored suits. But on a steamy summer day, the residential streets are absent of people and can possess an unsettling quiet. Where is everyone? You are reminded to lock the car and front door." I read most of the stories in this collection, and I wanted to share just a few highlights. The first story by Janet Fitch is called Sunrise, and I found this to be a nice, fresh start. It has really clean writing. It's bright. It's personable. The opening story does a great job capturing the look and atmosphere of Palm Springs, so I think it's a really nice opening story for the collection. This was followed by Eric Beetner's The Guest, which features a second home, a pool caretaker, and a dead body. Dead bodies are bad for property value. So, do you report a dead body when you come across one in your pool, or do you bury it and hope the problem goes away? You can guess where this story goes, and you can guess that the outcome is not the one the characters expect. I enjoyed this read, and I wasn't expecting anything less from Eric Beetner. Another story that I enjoyed is Rob Roberge's The Expendables. And this was an unusual story, a change of pace from typical noir. It's a dark tale about the nefariousness of big government control and torture, about the CIA, the FBI, these major institutions that operate behind the scenes. It's a story that looks soberly at the military-industrial complex's massive presence in Southern California. That's not a topic that I see written about very often, particularly in crime fiction, so it was good to see it here, and I'd like to see more of that in the future. Another story I enjoyed was by Rob Bowman, and it was called Everything Drains and Disappears. And this one explores a doomed romance between 2 young, desperate people. One of them starts a sensual massage business to make a little bit of money, and the other agrees to work with them by taking photographs through open windows while the sensual massages, I say that in quotes, are happening. Of course, this is a blackmail scheme, and this plan is going to go off without any problems, right? Of course. No, just kidding. Things go badly pretty quickly, and it makes for a pretty interesting story that looks hard at those who are desperate versus those who are so incredibly well off that they have their own private police forces. So that was a good read. And then the last one I wanted to talk about is a story called The Stand-In, written by J.D. Horn. And this is about a washed-up, has-been actress who grew up or came to fame or half fame in the glory days of Palm Springs, hung out with Frank Sinatra and the mafioso of the times, and is being interviewed by a podcaster about her past. She's just recently come out of jail for her involvement in a crime. The question is, did she actually commit the crime? Is the life that she talks about really the life she lived? The main character is prompted into some serious soul searching by the questions asked by the podcaster, and comes out at the other end of this story in a very memorable way where she redeems herself. I was surprised by this story. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it like I did, and it has probably my favorite ending of any of the stories I read in this collection. There were a few stories that I didn't love, but overall I would say there were more hits than misses, and I would recommend this book as a nice window into what is a pretty bizarre fucking place, Palm Springs, a place that I don't know much about, but I'm a little more enlightened now than I was before reading this book.
You know, one thing I've just was thinking of while you were giving that review is that most of the recent collections from the publisher have been solid. When I've given a not negative, but like moderate review of some of their city collections in the past, most of those are older. So I don't know if they're getting better material or they're finding better editors for these collections or what. But I mean, most of the ones we've looked at in the last couple of years here have been really solid collections and at least have some that are really standout stories. And even the ones that don't stand out as much are still pretty good and worth the price of admission.
They're hitting their stride. Maybe there's more readers, more writers, more energy toward detective, hardboiled, and noir fiction. It's good to hear. I'm excited about the collections that are coming out in the next few years. I know that they have one coming out on Denver, which is relatively close to where I live, so I'm going to be checking that one out.
Cool. Next up for me is another one that we received a review copy of. This is Paradise Palms, Red Menace Mob. This came out just this summer by Paul Haddad, and it is published by Black Rose Writing. This takes place in the late 50s of LA, Hollywood, and your basic premise here is this follows this family and location of Paradise Palms. It's a family-owned hotel and restaurant in the changing landscape of Hollywood of this late 50s, early 60s time frame. And there's a lot going on in both society and LA in this period, and this book tries to reflect some of that. Now, I'm going to say right off that I liked this book, but I didn't love this book. We'll get to what I liked and what I thought could have been better in just a moment. But right at the beginning of the novel, we meet the Shapiro family, and they are burying the matriarch, most of the character's mother in this case, and we are introduced to the several brothers and the father, Max. We're introduced to the father's girlfriend, Kitty Kay, who shows up to the funeral sort of unwanted by most of the rest of the family. And simply based on this very first chapter, our introductions to these characters, we know that this is going to be a family mess, and things are not going to go very smoothly for the Shapiros through the remainder of the book. With the passing of the mother, the brothers, David, Leo, and Rudy, get more involved with the family business, and they're pretty much concerned that their father is going to let Kitty make all the financial decisions and that they're going to get kind of written out of the business. David, Leo, and Rudy are all sort of, in a way, somewhat stereotyped characters where David's the older, responsible one. Leo is the middle child who kind of, goes both ways as far as responsibility goes, and Rudy is the young one who is very irresponsible and gets into all sorts of trouble. Now, this hotel is failing, but the land that it's on could be worth some cash. And the debate is, do they sell the hotel? Do they try to build it back up into its former glory years? And of course, Kitty wants the hotel for herself. She wants to get written into the will. And the brothers want their end of the business. And everybody has to deal with Max, who's getting old and stubborn. And we find out that there are some issues that maybe Max doesn't want to tell the rest of the family about. And that's where we enter into the idea of the mob being involved in this. In addition to these characters, we also have a band of misfits who sort of live at the hotel, an old washed-up actor, a drug fiend, and then the arrival of a young mysterious woman who quickly fills the role of the cook at the restaurant. What really plays out here is, I think, less of a crime novel and more of a family drama with crime elements. I do think it's interesting. It's an interesting time in LA's history and American history. It does reflect those changing times and new generations emerging. There's plenty of interesting characters and interesting situations going on in the book. However, I think one of the downfalls is that there's just too many different stories sort of thrown into the mix here, and we don't necessarily get to spend a lot of time with any one person to gain a real attachment. That said, the family story is interesting. Now, the mob elements are also interesting because normally when we get a mob story, we're looking at sort of the higher end of the mob hierarchy, or the thugs actually doing the job on the street. And in this case, we don't really get that. We get more of how is in this case, small family business affected by being loosely connected to the mob. That doesn't necessarily result in as dramatic of a story as we might get from, say, The Godfather or something like that. But it does reveal a different layer to that mob history in America and mob story that we don't normally get to see. Overall, like I said, I liked this book. I didn't love it. I think it's just a little bit too much thrown into the pot here, and I wish it had committed to itself. Is this a family drama story, or is this a crime story, and really heated up one of those elements? Paradise Palms, I recommend if some of the themes in there sound interesting to you, but if you're expecting a shoot-'em-up mob story, this isn't going to be the book for you.
I have another review of a ARC copy, an advanced reader copy. This is a book by a Point Blank listener named Dan Bronson, and the title of the novel is Someone to Watch Over Me. He decided to send us the book. I read it. I thought it was worth reviewing. So the things I liked about it, this is a story that's written in an engaging first-person voice. And the subject itself is insider Hollywood. We're talking in the 1940s, Hollywood in that golden age post-war. The novel starts slow, and it almost forced me to stop. But I held on, and the novel gained traction as we got to figure out the lay of the land and meet some of the characters. At about the quarter mark, it becomes a uniquely satisfying taste of old Hollywood grit and glamour. Here's the scoop. Jack Shannon works for Titanic Pictures as a studio publicist, or as he puts it, a nursemaid, and his task is to keep studio investments out of harm's way. In other words, he babysits movie stars and tries to keep them from drinking themselves silly, getting knocked up, or otherwise compromising their image and profitability. As you can imagine, this is a tough task, and he runs into trouble on a regular basis trying to keep these entitled brats from fucking up their own lives. The heart of the story revolves around Shannon's latest assignment: keep Hollywood starlet Savannah Stevens out of trouble. That's the main plot wheel. Stevens is a beautiful, troubled woman, and she has a tendency to disappear for weeks at a time. This is bad for business, and the studio wants Shannon to rein her in. Thing is, Savannah Stevens knows what's up. She knows why Shannon is there, and she outsmarts him and takes the powder. So there's a good tension between Shannon and Stevens when they are together, and I like Savannah as a character a lot. She's a character who shows very clearly the struggles she faces as being a woman trapped in this position of being both a celebrity and, in a sense, a slave, and also somebody who is an object, objectified for her sexuality. So when she disappears, Shannon has to find her, obviously. He meets her body double, Lorraine, who's a gal from Savannah's hometown. They came to Hollywood together with a third gal from the Midwest with big dreams, like so many people. Savannah made it big, but the others did not. Shannon learns all about this and begins to unravel the mystery of Stevens' disappearance. It ties into some other things. And at the halfway point of the book, the bodies and the trouble start to pile up. To quote Jack Shannon himself, In the course of a very few days, I've managed to misplace the movie star entrusted to my care, discover 3 murder victims, witness the death of a 4th, participate in a couple of cover-ups, enjoy the hospitality of the Catalina Sheriff's Department, and spend an hour or 2 in the thoughtful custody of their LA counterparts. While this book starts with more of a taste of Hollywood, the hard-boiled components and the components that make this a good book to review for the sake of this podcast are predominant. I found this to be a really well-structured, well-crafted, thoughtful, and engaging first-person read. The writing is strong. Bronson spent many years working in Hollywood. First, he was a professor. Then later on, he was in Hollywood working on scripts and doing other things. And now he's writing about that experience. He's obviously an insider. He has insider understanding of Hollywood. I appreciate that aspect of the novel. And while I'm personally not immensely interested in the ins and outs of Hollywood, because this book is written so well, I enjoy being taken there. I trust Bronson, and I trust that he knows what he's talking about. So if you're into that, if you're drawn to what Hollywood was like and a crime story related to that world, I think you will really enjoy this book. Bronson's that guy. Just be patient with the first, few dozen pages, and this book is a hit.
Cool. I probably need to go back and read that. I started it and then I misplaced the file and I kind of forgot about it, but that sounds intriguing and pretty good to me. It's kind of a little bit like a Ray Donovan story, but in a different era of Hollywood. Sometimes that stuff gets a little self-serving, but if it's really about just kind of how screwed up of a place it is, then I'm a little more inclined to want to read about it.
Oh, I agree with you. And at first it felt like it was going to be self-serving, but then that evaporated and we were left with a pretty good yarn that does not pull punches in its criticisms or mockery of the absurdity of the film industry.
Well, last up for me this episode is a few episodes back when we talked about Dorothy Hughes. I promised I would go to Amazon and track down the worst rated Dorothy Hughes novel. Which was actually hard because I had to get an ebook, and obviously if somebody has recently made the book an ebook, they thought it was worth republishing. The worst Amazon review that I could find was about 4 stars for Dorothy Hughes' The So Blue Marble. Now, this is her first mystery novel. It was published in 1940. It also says a lot about this particular book that it was selected as the first book to be reissued by Penzler Press in their American Mystery Classics series. So this isn't really much of a dud, but it's the biggest dud that I could find to review for this episode. So right off, we've gushed about Dorothy B. Hughes on this show before, and again, this is a good story. What I will say is that this is not the story for me, however. She tells this story of high society and the convoluted notion of high society well, but it didn't speak to me because I don't really care that much about rich people having sort of rich people problems. And that's what we get. It's 1940. We're introduced to a young woman, Griselda. She's only 24 years old. She's lived a rich life of wealth and access. She's already had a career as a Hollywood actress. She's married a prominent journalist and divorced him. She spent a significant part of her life traveling to Europe. She has started her own popular fashion line. So that's the kind of main character we get here. Now, right away in the book, she's basically walking home in New York. Her ex-husband is away, so she's going to make use of his apartment. Well, 2 twins, or twins, I guess, meet her in the street and basically very politely abduct her and bring her back to the apartment. And they are demanding the blue marble. So she doesn't know what the blue marble is. They assume that she does. That's how we start out this novel. Griselda has 2 sisters. She has an older sister, Anne, who's 26, frankly, fairly boring person. Now, her younger sister, Missy, is 16 and been essentially estranged from her older sisters for quite some time. She's been living with the mother in Europe, who's married to a count, or I don't know, something like that. Anyway, she's spoiled. She comes back to America and pretty much right away at the beginning of the book, we find out that she's working with these two, let's call them evil twins. What goes through the rest of this novel is, after we find out what the blue marble is, we also want to know, why is it so valuable? Why do people want it? And it becomes something of a low-key treasure hunt. There's definitely a lot of murders. There's double crossing. Are people who they say they are? And again, like I said, this is a hit. It's just not the book for me. So if you want, I guess I would call this a little bit more of a, it's a little more of a classic mystery tale, and it is Hugh's first offering. So you can see a lot of where she's going to go in her future work. You can see a lot of the potential that Hughes has. And if you really want to read all of her stuff, you're not going to go wrong with this particular book. I just can't give it as strong of a recommendation as I've given everything else that we've read by Dorothy B. Hughes.
I think I have that one. I downloaded a couple more of her books, and I do see books that are set in places like New York City, places in the East, and I'm instantly not as drawn to those stories as I am to her Southwestern work, in part because of my own biases, and also because that's how I know her to be great. I have one more book to share, and then I'm done for this session. And this book is going to be familiar to some readers. It's called Winter Counts. It was a fairly well-promoted and widely acclaimed book that came out last year. The author is David Heska Wanbli-Wyden, and I hope I got that pronounced correctly. He's an indigenous author, Lakota. He lives in Denver. I think he teaches up there. He's also a lawyer, and this is his debut novel. That is a crime fiction novel, roughly a detective sort of mystery that's set on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. Winter Counts tells the story of Virgil Wounded Horse, who's a tough guy / enforcer on the Rosebud Res. He's the guy that people call when justice fails to prevail via legal means, which means he gets called pretty often. Turns out heroin has made its way to the reservation, and Virgil's cousin or nephew, Nathan, who's like a bright 16-year-old kid, he gets tangled up with the drug. Wounded Horse is pissed off about this. He's, a drug in the community is one thing, but when that drug hits close to home, when the consequences of that drug hit close to home, Wounded Horse gets pissed. He wants to figure out who's bringing in the drugs, who's on the ground, pushing drugs in the schools. He does not want to see a heroin epidemic take hold of the Rosebud Reservation, which has enough problems. Of course, it's more than just a few heroin dealers that make this book a complicated noir mystery. There's some sketchy shit going on in the tribal government. There's shit about injustice and the way that the FBI refuses to investigate crimes on the res. A lot of questions about jurisdiction. There's a lot of tension between traditional native culture and the 21st century settler colonial reality. Wounded Horse is a biracial man stuck between identities. His self-tension is one of the best features of this book. He's a guy who tries to understand his place in this world, and it's not an easy place to find, that place where he feels at peace. Ultimately, I wanted to love this book. I was super psyched about it. There's a dearth of indigenous noir out there, and any contributions to the genre I take seriously. I reached out on Facebook last year asking for recommendations to indigenous noir. I wanted to do a whole episode dedicated to it. I wanted to write about it. And how many replies did I get? Like 2. And most of the writers were not indigenous, and the writers that are indigenous are not writing crime fiction. So this book is special. It's important that it's out there. The only problem with it is that I didn't love the book. One thing about it that was problematic is that the plot seemed so telegraphed for me. From page 1 to the end, I knew exactly what was going to happen. Every character felt to me like they were kind of one note or straining credulity, characters that were there for a reason, and they lack the complexity that I seek when I'm reading literary noir fiction. I wavered on whether or not to review the book at all, because I wanted to dedicate a whole episode to how awesome this book was. But I can't, because I didn't love the book. Is it a good debut? It's a fine debut. And I will read the next one if David writes another one, because I think this is an important subject. This is a subject that needs more books about it. I want to see life on reservations. I want to see the reality of indigenous people in the Americas in the 21st century. However, I wouldn't recommend this book for the writing. I would call this a caveated recommendation. It's a non-fatal shot to the shoulder. I wish I could say it wasn't, but I do hope that there's another book because the subject matter and the setting are freaking awesome. So,
well, that's unfortunate to hear that. I've got that one on a loan for an audiobook here coming up, and I'm going to listen to that and give it my own judgment. But you're right. I mean, it's such a important voice. I'm going to go into it with as fresh of eyes or ears, I guess in this case, as I can, and maybe I'll have a little different take on it.
Yeah, please do. I hope to be proved wrong. I felt feeling bad about the book, and I was on Goodreads looking for reviews that, there are a lot of strong reviews, but I was looking for reviews that helped to back me up because it almost felt like I was gaslighting myself. I am curious to hear what you think. If anything, I hope that this book encourages other Native authors to step out and see that crime fiction is a great space for them to develop their craft. We need more of it, and I look forward to seeing that happen. So,
hear, hear. I'm going to steer towards one quick thing here before we close out, and that is I have to blame you for getting me back into audiobooks.
Ha!
I believe it was around James Bond that you kind of got me thinking about doing audiobooks again. I haven't listened to one for years. And for those who don't do that, like me, go through your local library. They probably have access to things like Overdrive and Libby. You can get the audiobooks for free, and you don't have to go through Audible. Don't do that if you don't have to. Man, I'm using it more for... I felt like I was missing science fiction and fantasy, and that's kind of what I'm using it for, is to get that dose. But wow, I really enjoyed doing it. It's been fun, especially those read by the author. I'm revisiting some classics. I just listened to A Wizard of Earthsea read by Harlan Ellison, and that was
Nice.
That was fantastic. And it's all free if you go through the library. So do that.
I've been on the audiobook kick this entire year. I used to listen to a lot of podcasts, but I realize with the amount of books I have to read for this show, and also because I do a lot of walking, I'm out walking 2 to 3 hours a day. I can read while I walk. I have that special gift. I can hold a book in front of me and walk and not fall on my ass. But it's even easier to listen to audiobooks. I set them at double speed, and I just go, and I let the story carry me through my walks. And it's amazing how many books you can knock out in a week when you're listening constantly through earbuds. You were already reading an incredible amount of books every year. I can only imagine what your count's going to be this year.
Let's not speculate on that. I think it would be ridiculous. But coming down the road, Justin, what do our listeners have to look forward to?
Yeah, we have I'll share a few. I'll share the next 3 episodes. Next episode is A Subject Unknown. We're going to look at ecological noir. I know we've been promoting this for a little while now, and y'all are probably not any clearer on what exactly we're going to review. We have a short pile of books we're going to look at, some in common. I still don't have those in front of me, and I'm not going to share them with you. We're just going to let you have to stew in that one and wait until the episode airs. So that's episode 61, Ecological Noir. Episode 62, we do a deep dive, nice and simple. We visit Ed McBain and his first book in the 87th Precinct series. Is widely considered to be the first police procedural, and that book is Cop Hater. And then episode 63, well, it's currently scheduled to be a 5-round review, but we might very well change that. We're going to mix things up to accommodate shifting schedules this autumn, and also because 5-round reviews take a lot of time, and people don't really like to listen to them as much as some of our other episodes. So we'll stop there, and we'll tweak what we're doing going into fall, and we'll get back to you on that. So make sure that you pick up Ed McBain's Cop Hater. It's a very short book, and it's one that I think we're going to have a very good discussion on. How do they contact us, Kurt?
We would love to hear from you. The best way to do that is probably send us an email at pointblanknoir@gmail.com. One thing I would be curious to hear about from the listeners is, if we do reviews, how do you prefer to hear them? Do you like these short reviews? Do you like the rapid fire ones we used to do? How do you like to hear reviews, if at all? So let us know that. You can also get in touch with us on Facebook. There is 2 pages on Facebook. There is the main page for the podcast at Point Blank, Hardboiled Noir and Detective Fiction. And then there is also a group associated with the Facebook page. And that's probably where you're going to find the most discussion of the show and crime fiction, both the written word and films, in our group. And it's fairly light traffic, but you can interact. Well, it's actually very light traffic for a Facebook group, but you can interact with other listeners to the show, discuss past topics or upcoming topics, ask a question, whatever you want to do. We can do that on the Facebook group. So I guess until next time, we appreciate you listening to us. If you'd love to give us a review on iTunes, that would be appreciated, but we'll see you next time.
Take care.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.